Billionaire brothers Charles and David Koch are the poster boys for the top 1%, using their money and power to fuel the growing inequality in America. Day in and day out, we see the Kochs using their billions to purchase politicians and policy, taking a terrible toll on democracy as they knock down the middle class, stomping on poor people.
There is furor, uproar, indignance over the news conservative billionaires Charles and David Koch are spending close to $900 million on the 2016 presidential campaign. Of course, that noise is coming from the left, but facts are they don't have much to whine about. They're right up there when it comes to throwing cash at politicians, just like everybody else, and we're not even a year away from the presidential election. Let's welcome to MidPoint senior congressional correspondent for the Washington Examiner, David Drucker joins us. David, pleasure to talk to you.
Great to be here.
Well, David, here we go. We're told that the Kochs are dangerous. They're squashing the middle class. They're knocking people down. Wait a minute now. Are they really that dangerous when you put them in comparison to all the others who give money to all the various political campaigns?
No, they're just some of the newer additions to the field of wealthy people who want to try and influence the political process, who have their own ideas about how the government should run and who should get elected. This is nothing new. And interestingly enough, let's see how much they actually spend and what they spend it on. As much money as they spent in 2014, and as significant as that money was in many regards, by the time you got around to the fall campaign, the Koch Brothers organizations were really only spending on a few Senate races, and their money wasn't as pervasive as many people believed.
Well, let me get to that. When you say that not as pervasive, because you and I both know when it comes to the public perception, they will say that the Kochs are buying the politicians, buying the lobbyists, buying the vote at this point, and they are setting the course of where the Republican Party goes and then making sure that the Republicans win, the Democrats lose. We've heard all this before. But what's the truth about all that? What's the truth about where that money is being spent and how it is, if at all, bending any of the political races?
Well, I think if you want to back up for a minute and ask, can you really buy off a politician? Well, there are some corruptible politicians on occasion, and we've seen them arrested, thrown in a can. The truth is, occasionally money can influence a politician on one particular subject matter, whether, it's the environment or whether it's, anything. I could go on and on. But at the end of the day, what really happens is, money gets behind politicians that already have a set agenda. They have to agree with the money. And if money was that good at controlling Washington, they'd be getting a lot more bang for their buck. I mean, wealthy people spend a lot of money on politics, and they don't get a huge return for it. And the thing about the Kochs that is different, however, is just that they've got a lot more money than other wealthy people, and they've put together a collection of political organizations that are doing a whole bunch of work, whether it's digital and voter ID and things like that, or grassroots activism. So they're a little bit more active than others. But at the end of the day, look at who's been elected. Look at what's happening in Congress. I wouldn't call this some sort of libertarian cult nirvana here on Capitol Hill.
When we get down to it, at the end of the day, with all this money that's being thrown out here, not only from the Koch brothers, but also from George Soros, that I'll talk about here in a moment as well, are we not inevitably, though, in order to keep some faith and trust with the American public, coming to a time when we are going to have to know where this money is going? There's going to have to be tighter regulation, tighter laws, tighter legislation, because the American people are starting to ask questions on both sides where this cash is going.
Yeah, I understand a lot of that, but the ironic thing is you've seen the rise of these sorts of groups, some that have to report their donors and some that do not. You've seen the rise of groups controlled by people like Charles David Koch in the wake of heavier and heavier campaign finance legislation. So the more you try and regulate it, the more it always finds a way to go where it wants to go. So my answer is, if you want to try and stop this and try and make it more democratic, lowercase d, what you ought to do is strip away most of the campaign finance legislation and just require as much disclosure as possible, and people will make up their own mind. But more legislation, you're only going to drive it deeper underground, and you're going to keep complaining about dark money.
In your opinion, let me get to George Soros, chairman of the Soros Fund Management hedge fund company. He's number 27 on the recent Forbes list with a net worth of $23 billion. Now, he doesn't give the kind of money here that the Kochs do, but there are those who say that he is to be feared even more than the Kochs simply because of where that money is going and the fact that he operates a lot more under the radar than anybody else. Do you agree with that criticism?
Well, I think that I think if you're on the left, you fear the Koch money, and if you're on the right, you fear George Soros and other people like Tom Steyer and things of that nature, and you feel like it's a little bit nefarious. I tend to think that, like I've said before, a lot of this money can have some effect, but usually the impact is far overblown. What I would say is that for years, left of center advocates had a lot more outside money to play with, whether it was union money or people like Soros, and it's only in recent years that conservatives have gotten into the game with some heavy cash. But that's the nature of politics. If you believe in something, you want to try and change the political process. This country, the way you do that is to try and elect people that agree with you, and that requires, in a country this big of 350 million people, that requires money.
I have to ask you on this report, and this is from last month, but when it came out, it kind of caught a bunch of us by surprise, certainly did me, when David Koch basically said he is a liberal on social issues, but he backs candidates based on their fiscal policies. It sounds like he's trying to cut the middle here a little bit and basically tell people, I'm not such a bad guy after all.
Well, I think he might be, and I know that the Koch brothers have been a little bit sensitive to all of the attacks leveled at them over the past couple of years. But, guess what? I know a lot of strong fiscal hawks who don't happen to be social conservatives but still vote Republican every time, or for the conservative every time. That conservative happens to be, pro-life, maybe opposed to same-sex marriage, just because you have to prioritize issues. You don't get everything you want, and that's the way you vote. Look, I know a lot of fiscal conservatives that prioritize social issues higher, and therefore keep voting for the Democrat or the liberal, even though they're not happy with their taxes going up.
15 seconds, quick answer here. Fair to say, though, that if you are a Republican, you need to be on their good side. Ted Cruz recently said, let's be very clear. I admire Charles and David Koch. You still got to make sure that you know where your bread is buttered and the money's coming from, right?
I don't think you have to be on their good side, but it doesn't hurt.
It never hurts when you have this kind of money, $900 million, billions. It all just gets tossed around after a while. And little people like us, we wonder where all those zeros go every single day. David Drucker, pleasure to have you on the show, my friend. Thanks for joining us.
Anytime. Thank you.
All right, take care. I used to be almost no one knew where law enforcement was lying in wait. I used to be that way. Other people, you never used to know where they were. Old times and new technology has cops worried the bad guys are stalking them using this, a cell phone. We're back on MidPoint.